In the previous lesson, we said we'd discuss both the head element and the body element. Let's start with the body. The body is where we'll put all of the content of the page. Generally, that means all the stuff that we see on the screen and also hidden stuff that might show up on the screen later. For example, some websites might have a cool animation where the main section of the web page starts as hidden and then fades into the screen. That would still go in the body even though we don't see it right away. If we head back over to zombo.com, we can use the dev tools to look at the body. We'll see that everything that we can see on the web page can be found in the body. Again, on zombo.com, make sure you have your dev tools open and you're on the Elements tab, and then go ahead and select the body. Inside the body, the first child we see is a div that contains the logo of the site. The second child of the body contains the spinning animation, which I've turned off for now so you don't have to look at it while it spins. The third child of the body is the audio element that plays the sound, and then a button. So are there any other rules for the body? Well, almost every single HTML element can go in the body. There's a few elements that we're only allowed to put in the head, and we'll cover those in the next lesson. For now, I've made a list of some of the most common elements in the body. We've got 5 columns of them in no particular order. The ones in red on the right do go in the body, and they are fairly common, but we won't need them for a couple of units, so we're going to skip them for now. Let's try out all these other elements in Replit, and then we'll make a practice web page using most of them in just a couple of lessons. In Replit, click the Create REPL button. Make sure you choose HTML, CSS, JS for the template, and then name it whatever you want. I'm going to go with HTML body element, as we'll be testing out many different HTML elements that can go inside the body. Once you've typed out that title, click Create REPL. Our HTML file gets created with a default template. Notice the doc type preamble up top that we mentioned in the previous lesson. Additionally, we have our outermost HTML element, followed by the head, and also the body. We can go ahead and delete everything inside of the head for now. We won't be needing it. And then go ahead and delete everything inside the body as well. Press the Run button, and we should have an empty page. Now remember, our goal is to test out each of these most common elements. So let's start with the H1 through H6 elements. I'm going to type them out. You're welcome to pause the video here and try typing them out on your own, or you can watch me do it, and then we'll explain the difference between them after we're done typing. Go ahead and hit the Run button once you're done typing. And now we can see 6 different headers on the screen. Their default styles are all slightly different. The H1 is going to be larger than the H2, so on and so forth, all the way down. Let's go ahead and try out the paragraph element, the div, and the span element. So that would be a P, and then a div, and then a span. Now these 3 are going to act almost the same. There's some minor differences. So notice that the paragraph element has some spacing above and below it. That's part of its default styles. The div does not have any spacing. It's stacking up right on top of the span. The spans are interesting. They have a default CSS property set, the display property, and that will make them go ahead and stack up next to each other. We'll learn more about how that works exactly once we get to the CSS lessons. Divs and paragraphs would not stack up next to each other like that. For example, if we made one more div, they would stack on top of each other instead of side by side. Additionally, we have nav elements, header elements, main elements, and footer elements. We'll type all of those out and we'll discuss them in a moment. Go ahead and press the Run button. Notice that these look exactly like the divs. That's because the nav, header, main, and footer are simply more descriptive div elements. We'll learn about this 2 or 3 lessons from now when we talk about semantic HTML, but generally you always want to choose an HTML element that closely matches the purpose of that section of your website. For example, if we're putting a bunch of links on a page, maybe instead of using a div, we would put all of those links, those anchor elements, we would put them inside of a nav instead of a div element, even though the default styles are the same on the div and the nav. Similarly, with header, main, and footer, you might want to use those for the different sections of your website. Notice that the header is not the head, but it's supposed to be the header of your content. So maybe a chapter title of a book would go in the header, something like that. Next, we have a UL and an OL element. These are unordered list and ordered list. Inside of them, we need to put the LI element, a list item element. When we do that and we press the run button, it automatically creates a list for us. The UL is going to have bullet points, and if we try out the OL, the ordered list, we'll see that it has numbers instead of bullet points because it is ordered. Go ahead and press the run button, and now we see that we have test with a bullet point and test with the number 1 in front of it. The numbering happens automatically. If you go ahead and add another LI element and press run, it will now be 1 and 2. The I element and the EM element can be used to create an italics effect. Generally, we would be able to set this property on any element with CSS, so we don't have to use the I element or the EM element to get that italics effect. However, we'll see in the semantic HTML lesson that there are some good reasons you would want to use an I element or an EM element. Similarly, the B element and the strong element will create bold text. Again, that same effect can be accomplished on any element that we want with CSS, and we'll learn about that in the CSS lessons, but there are some good reasons we would want to use a B element or a strong element, mainly for screen reader purposes, and we'll talk about that more in the semantic HTML lesson. We have the U element used for underlining text. This is going to be in the same category as the previous ones, where you could style this on any element with CSS. However, there are some good reasons you would want to use a U element, mainly for screen reader purposes. Finally, we have a code element. Press the run button, and you'll see that this creates a monospace font effect. What do we mean by monospace font? Well, each of the letters is taking up the same width on the page. Kind of makes it look like you're reading code. The last two elements I want to discuss are the anchor element, which we already briefly tried using once. If we go ahead and run without any attributes on this anchor element, it's not clickable. So this test link doesn't go anywhere. However, if we add an href attribute, we can then link to wherever we want. For example, google.com. Go ahead and run your code again, and now this is clickable. This is a real link. It will take us to google.com. Finally, the very last element I'd like to discuss before we move on to the head of our document is the image element. This is a void element, so it does not need a closing tag. It uses an src attribute, usually pronounced source. Inside of there, we can put a link to any image that we want. Let's go ahead and look up the image of a sad cat. Click on images on Google, find one that you like. This one looks fairly sad. I'm going to right click, scroll all the way down to copy image address. We don't want the image itself, we want the address, right? The web address. And then we're going to go ahead and paste that into our source attribute. Press run, and what you'll see is that actually appears on our web page. So now we know how we can get images to start appearing on our web page. This is going to be very useful throughout the rest of the course. That's it for testing out all of our elements. Please continue to play around with them on your own time. If you have any questions about any of the elements, remember, MDN, Mozilla Developer Network, is your best friend. You can read about all the ins and outs of these elements on MDN.